so they don't bang into each other. So you make sure you alternate where these are, okay? And I just chose a 1/2 inch hole. I know that on each side of the hole I'm going to want to leave a square area, and those square areas on spindle turning are called pummels. And there are a couple of different pummels. There are straight pummels where you come in straight, and then there are angled ones, and you can even do an OG one, okay? On a very small spindle, those cuts are easy to make. The more diameter that you have the piece, the bigger the piece is. Like if you get a 6x6 that you have to cut a square pummel in, the harder that cut is to make. Okay, so you want to know that up front. Okay, now, so I know basically this I want to leave square, the very bottom I want to leave square. If I were to just go in with a spindle roughing gouge and try to rough that out, what's the probability of what's going to happen? I might be cutting here and I can take a big splinter all the way down here. So the way to avoid that is to make like a stop cut first. So before you turn the lathe on, you make sure it's clear. And the pencil lines are just dark enough that I can see them as it's turning, okay? So using the skew with the toe down, this part's going to be round, so I start on that side of it, and I just go in and I make a couple little V cuts. Okay? No big deal. Nothing splintered out or cracked or anything. And I work my way back towards this line. And what you're doing is developing your muscle memory and getting down to the height that you need for making that cut. And after a while you can tell, okay, I've almost got all the way through. So I still have room, I can test it out a little further. And I can tell now I've gone all the way through. Okay, it's cut all 4 sides. So I'll go right back to this line and straight down. Now when I made that final cut, what I had to do was turn the handle of the tool so that this edge of the bevel is going in at 90 degrees. Okay, if I tried to do it this way, my cut's going to go in that direction. And that's why I say if you have to do the bigger diameters, making that straight cut is a lot harder. So on something like this, I've marked off a second line. And that line, it's very easy then to do, just do a bevel cut there. So at this point, I would switch to a 3/8 beading parting tool. With the 3/8 beading, normally I would wear a face shield, but on this I know I'm pretty safe. The chances of something coming off are pretty minimal. Besides, these are safety glasses. So now I know, like if I had just come in down here, okay, as Jerry said, you can see how you're getting all the chip out on the corners and things like that. But because I have this stop cut up here, I can come in here now. and take that down to flat, and I'm not chipping out the part that I need to have square. Does that make sense? And I like this tool for even doing the little bevel cuts. If you prefer to use a skew, use the skew. If you prefer to use a spindle gouge, use the spindle gouge. Whatever suits your purpose, okay? So now I can take my roughing gouge, and this part's going to be round. And if you're listening, you can almost hear when you get down to round. Okay? Why shouldn't you be using this on a bowl? The main reason is if you look at the thickness of the metal here at the throat, it's very thin compared to, say, a 5/8 bowl gouge. 5/8 bowl gouge, you can take it in your hands and go like this, and the likelihood is you're not going to bend it. So if you get a catch with it, the chances of it breaking are minimal unless they didn't heat treat it all the way down. Something like this, the metal is thin enough that a strong person can bend it quite easily. So you don't want to get a catch with it. These are called spindle gouges because they're only for spindles. That means the grain is going this way and you're doing something like this. Okay, so I've got that part done. Now I'll go down to the next section and basically repeat the action. I know that this in-between section is going to be round. So from both ends, I make my stop cuts. I work my way back to the line. I stop. I'm getting close to the line. I'm just starting to break through. Not quite. Okay, I know it's through. Now, this is pretty short, so I'm not going to use the spindle roughing gouge on that. You could use a spindle gouge. This is my favorite tool, the 3/8 beating parting tool. Do my bevel cuts. And I hold my tool fairly tight because my arthritic fingers aren't very good anymore. Before you start. Okay, so you make sure it's clear before you start. We'll practice cuts, find out how far I have to go, get all the way down. And one thing you might find as you're doing these cuts is, okay, you go all the way through on one side, but out of the 4 sides, one side you won't. And the probability is when you use your center punch on the end, on your X, to make a hole to put the drive centers into in the live center. When you go into wood like an oak, there's hard grain, soft grain. So it doesn't matter how accurate you try to be to push this right onto the X, it's going to go over onto the softer grain and go exactly where it wants. So that's what often on a spindle will cause that effect, okay? All right, so I know I've gone down there. These tool rests aren't quite long enough. But, you know, this just shows you all the types of things that your mind is going through. You're evaluating things, making decisions, looking at new ways of holding something. You might, for example, have already done something like this. You might have a totally different way than I do. You might decide your way's better than mine, or you might decide, well, I'll maybe try her way next time I have to do, you know, something like that. That's why it's, you know, demos are important because you can always pick up a new idea in some way, shape, or form. And that's just my opinion. Now, did I get it perfect? Maybe not. Does it matter? No. Now that's a wide enough span. I can go back to the roughing gouge. Okay. And looking back at it, I can see in this one, I didn't go all the way down to flat, and I still have room there. And yes, I could use the skew. Make sure I go down to flat. Does anybody know what causes a catch with the skew? Can I borrow you, Dan? Jerry? I think it's important that if you understand what causes a catch, you can avoid making one, because what causes a catch with a skew is exactly the same thing that causes a catch with any other tool. Okay? So the reason I need you, because this lathe doesn't go slow enough. Okay? So I'm just going to have you become my power source. Yeah. Okay? So if you do that, so with the tool, you anchor the tool. No. He's perfect the way he is. Leave him alone. You let the bevel rub. You slowly raise the handle, and you can see it starts cutting. Okay? Now, when you get, that's good for a moment. When you get thin, kind of spirally shavings, you know you're doing it right. Okay? Where people run into problems is they get greedy. They say, well, I need to go down more in that area. So what they do is, after they've anchored it, they've rubbed the bevel, they've started the cut, they raise the handle a little bit further, and they come off the bevel. And that's where it happens. So let's do a catch, okay? Anchored, bevel's rubbing, I'm cutting away. Now I get greedy, and look at that. And whether I'm using a spindle gouge or the 3/8 beading parting tool, that's exactly what causes the catch. If I need that to taper down, like if I wanted this whole spindle tapered, like on the leg of that chair right behind him, you start at the end that's going to be the smallest, and you take a little cut, and you come back a little more, and you come back a little more, and you create the taper that way. Trying to do it all in one big cut is going to give you a problem. Okay? Thank you for your help. Yes, give it. Okay, I've done a few of these, so, and when I have to do spindles very much, I end up making storyboards. So I can kind of line this up with basically where I want things to be. I make marks where it's the bottom of a cove. I do dotted lines, or the high points of a bead. Just enough that when the piece is turning, I can kind of see where I'm at. And if it's not perfect, you know what? That's okay too. In this day and age, I don't believe people have to be perfect as often as some people think we have to be. Normally with spindles, you work from the tailstock down towards the headstock. Okay. So I know this is approximately where the top end of that's going to be. And when you're using this as a parting tool, if you kind of wiggle it, then you give yourself clearance. Okay. And I switch between tools a lot. Okay, so from this line, I want a curve going this way. Alan Batty taught me when you're making beads, use your finger on top so that you turn this way. But if I want to turn the other way, my wrist won't turn. But if I put my finger on that side of the tool, now it will. And it gives you a little more control. Now that tool makes nice beads. You know, these tools work really nicely as well. You start out with it kind of flat on top. And then just turning your wrist, you can get a nice curve. The thing with either one of these tools, if you just try and go like that, you're going to get to a point where it doesn't cut properly and it's going to take off. What you have to do is remember that if the handle starts out straight back here, by the time you get over here, the handle should be pointing this way. A lot of people, if you watch somebody demo, don't just look at the cutting edge, look at the movement of the handle through the cut. Okay? I probably shouldn't have used an old dry piece of wood. Now, say you got that far along and you just can't get it round. Yep, it's starting with about 40 grit or skew. Nothing says you can't put your skew on its side. And round a bead that way. So that's a way that a lot of people don't think of using it. The skew also works really well on the flat. Reduce it that way. So you've got different cuts that you can make with skew. Okay? Okay, let's see. So there's kind of a cove in there of some sort. It's a small one, so I'll use a smaller. Now, when you do a cove, I guess I should have talked about this first. A spindle is basically a pencil. Okay? Now, some of you aren't old enough to remember when every kid had one of these in their pocket. Because at school, we didn't have pencil sharpeners. You had one of these. Don't take it to school today. Would you ever have taken your pocket knife and done this? Two reasons you wouldn't. First of all, you would have scars all over your fingers. You get blood all over your clothes. And then your mom would give you heck when you got home. And the other thing is you'd catch the wood on the end grain and it'd splinter back off. Well, all spindles are exactly the same. So you notice I had marked off the top of the high point here. So my cut goes from high to low. And if you look at a pencil, that's what you're doing. You cut from high to low. That way the fibers are lying down and they're supported as you're making your cut. Does that make sense? Okay. I know for some of you this is pretty basic, but so when you do a cove, and think about a cove is this shape. Well, here's some. Okay, take one of these. Here's a cove. Here's high, and here's low. So this side of the cove, you cut in that direction. This side, you cut in that direction. Okay? And that's what people forget. They try and do it all in one. So start near the center line. A little cut in each direction. And don't do that. Okay, do you know why it happened? It's because the bevel wasn't 90 degrees to the wood going in. So instead of starting here, the tool should have been here, and then you can go in. Now, if you're still having a problem with making that cut, there's nothing says you can't make a little side cut like that so that the bevel has something to go against and then come in and make the cut. Okay? Now, if you have a number of spindles to do, and the coves all need to be basically the same shape, and you have trouble getting that center of the cove round, you tend to get a V cut instead. There's nothing says you can't use something like this, okay? In order to get, if you need a bigger cove or a littler cove, in order to get the round in the bottom. Just remember, your cuts on the side going to the bottom of the cove still have to be in the proper direction, even though you're using a scraper. Like this one will fit in there quite nicely. Raise the tool rest a little bit. And using something round, it's pretty hard not to get the bottom of your cove round. Okay, and if you have to do a number of them and they have to all match, that's the easiest way to do it. Okay, now what did I do on the top? That was just a V cut. Not quite clean enough. Okay. So that's good enough for that. I'm standing here trying to think of how many more ways I can screw up to teach you how not to. Okay. So this is a cove right here. That's where I want the center of the cove. These are the outer edges of it. Actually, that's one's little. Okay. Now, if you look on the very top right here, on both sides of the cove, you see a flat area. Okay. Anybody know what those are called? Okay, in Jerry's world, okay, they actually, believe it or not, have a proper name. They're called fillets. And no, you can't eat them. Yeah, when you get into commercial turning, you have to know all these terms. There's a whole book full of them. So my cove got a little bit, my fillets are a little bit too wide. When I applied for my registration on the Registry of Professional Turners in England, you had to know the names of all these parts. Now I just want to round this over a little bit. Now another tool I like for doing those is a badan. These are typically used in France and parts of Europe. The bevel is on this side. And after you've sharpened it on the grinder like this, what you have to do is take a stone and take the burr off of the top here, and then you use the tool upside down this way. And it's like half a skew, so it gets into tighter, smaller areas. So hopefully I'm exposing you to a few tools you haven't seen before or used in quite the same way. And you should, between the sections, make cuts in to define those areas. Can you tell I'm used to my controls on this side of the lathe? Okay, I don't like that, so I'm going to clean that up before I go anywhere. Now, right in the center, between two coves, I've got a bead. Now, you can use the Badan, you can use the 3/8 beading tool, you can use the spindle tool, you can use the skew to create that little bead. But you can also use a beading tool. And they now make them in 4 or 5 different sizes. I mark what diameter these are because looking at that and finding my ruler to see if that's the right width is a royal pain. So I might decide, okay, I've got a big enough space. What the heck? I want to use the 3/8 instead. I'll pass these around so you can look at them. They're the new Easy Wood ones. They do have a negative rake on them, and they do tend to work fairly well. Yeah, I use a big one. Okay, so I want a bead in the middle of that. And this is really hard. Now I find the beading tools go in a little deeper than I like. So what I tend to do is use the Badan. I only go in and I leave a little flat area on the top. And then I can just round the corner like that. On each side of a bead, usually there's a, what do we call those flat areas again? Right. What do you call these big square areas? This. Now, one reason I stayed with this tool instead of going to the 3/8 was because I wanted my fillets to be that specific size. Okay, so in the center area, I've got another cove. Okay. Okay, so that's one side then. Now I do the other. This was not a very good piece of wood to choose for a demo. Okay. So it's a half bead on this end. Say you got to an area like that and you think, I want to get rid of that line, but I don't want to screw up the half bead. Nothing says you can't take something like this. So basically, it's done. Just sand in it, okay? I don't think you need to learn how to sand, do you? These are dowels, and I have a whole set of dowels in different sizes. Are really good for sanding coves. So if I have to sand a cove there, you wrap it around the dowel. And I'd use a bigger one on a section like this. Because if you just straight use your finger, you may not have round fingers, you may have a flat side on them. Whereas, like I have some that are 3/8 and a full inch dowels. And you can use those for sanding to keep things round. Okay, so that's another trick for you if you want. I guess I'd better sand it. And after a while, you get a feel for, okay, how far can I go down with that before it's going to come apart on me. And I don't like that shape. And that's enough. Really nice piece of kit you can have real close. You can put a screw here and just hang it, okay, and just sand that off or cut it off or take it over to a bandsaw and then just sand the top round. You could put a tenon on there if you want and put it into a chuck with a tenon. Just make sure your tenon you undercut on this side so that the outer edges are what sit flat. Then you have to make a hole for the tenon to go into. All right, so if that were cut off, that would be basically almost done. Okay, so then let's see. The base. Okay, all I did was on the drill press was drilled a hole big enough with a Forstner bit. So I drilled a hole big enough for the jaws to fit into. And using the Forstner bit, it leaves a hole in the center, okay, which is okay. And then well, I guess I might as well open it. These set screws as well, do not put them in as tightly as you can. So all I did was I drilled a hole and that I could fit the tenon onto. And because of the mechanics of the gears on a chuck, make sure you always tighten both holes. I don't know how this is going to turn, so not bad. Now, wow. You can decide at this point, like if you wanted to put a tenon on that base, you could put your hole in now on this side and then drill all the way through for gluing it. If you decide this is too wide, now would be the time you can trim off as much as you want. Make it whatever shape you want. This is faceplate turning, which is totally different from spindle turning. So the grain is going basically in this direction. So you want to cut towards this edge this way and that way on the other side. Okay. And the one thing I didn't bring was a bowl gouge. Okay, but a spindle gouge will do. Maybe it goes the other way. Okay. Doesn't hurt to bring up the tailstock. And even if you put a mark in there, that's okay because you want the screw to go all the way through to go into your base. So quite often you'll see people will come in with their bowl gouge and go straight across the end to even it up. Well, you can get it to splinter out on you quite nicely that way. So the best approach is start on a corner . Ooh, interesting grind. Usually this side of the grind, we try to make a curve like this. This one's slightly undercut, which means they spent too long grinding the side rather than the tip. I think I use almost a 5/8 most of the time at home. Now, I've cut enough in here that I can go in across there just to make this flat. Because I don't have to worry if it splits out on this side, but I don't want it splitting out on that side. Now, just like on the spindle part, you have a flat area usually at the bottom of a base, and it goes by the same name, so it's called a fillet too. And what size you make it is entirely up to you. Now on a curve like that, you could also use something like this. Notice I'm not going back and forth. I'm still cutting in the right direction. Okay, excuse me, that's to the left, but it's the correct direction. Okay. That looks a little high to me. But we'll leave it high. Having a little extra weight in the bottom is good, because then you don't have to worry about the thing tipping over. Having a little more width can be good. Depends on where you're going to put the thing at home. Like mine goes beside the sink in the kitchen. Handle down, bevels rubbing. So you're doing more of a shear cut. And if you want to see the shape you're cutting, you want to be looking up here, not down there. I've got a nice set of spiral blades or beads going around there. More than one way to solve a problem, right? I want to leave a flat enough area here for the bottom of that to go against. And if I want to make sure it's flat, you take your handy dandy ruler that you keep magnetized to your lathe. And you can do like a push cut. On a push cut, instead of the handle down, the handle comes up almost level. It helps if you have some bevel to work with. Nothing says I can't use a different tool. These tools you can use on their side. And use more of a shear scrape with them. Now, if you want to get fancy, you want to put a bead in there or something else. You know, at the end of the day, it's your piece. You can do whatever the heck you like. Okay? So basically, all that has to happen there is sand that. Okay? I don't think you need to watch me sand, do you? If you wanted to do some decoration along the side, I could take some of these beading tools and put 3 beads here. Take a wire on the spindle. If you wanted to burn with the wire, just take any wire. Make a handle on the end. Do not wrap it around your fingers. Just come down and you can burn the lines. On faceplate, it's much harder to burn it. So what I would do is I would use another homemade tool from a screwdriver. Take an old screwdriver, sharpen it on 3 sides to create a pyramid tool or a pointy tool. When you use it with one of the flats up. Right of the tool rest is important. You want to be cutting your center. Say arbitrarily, I decide I want 3 lines there. Okay, using the flat side up, it's just push it in. If I want to turn those into beads, I can take like the Badan and make beads quite easily with them. Yeah, yeah, or a piece. Yeah, the samples of masonite and that you can get there, and you just push them into the lines and that burns them. And if you put the lines in, you don't like them, what do? Cut them off. Nobody said they had to stay there. But I think what I'd prefer, oh, what the heck. That's what keeps you from getting old, is having to bend over all the time and pick stuff up. I'm sure that's why you drop things regularly. What the heck? I decided I want a bead right here. That one's too big. That's better. Like I said, I like to use my Badan just to finish rounding them off. Once you get in the habit of using your finger like this and just turning your wrist, beads, especially little ones, become very easy to do. If I want to go up and turn those into beads, okay. But you get the idea anyway. There. That'll. Yeah, you can use this. You can use the side of this because you've actually got three sides on, so you can go in. And that'll round them as well. Or you can go back with the skew and round them. There's lots of options. Take the tools you've got and start looking at all the ways they can be used. Okay? Okay, now. Got to remember if it's a mortise or a tenon to know whether you go left or right. And if you do upset screws, make sure you undo them before you try to take it off. I had a cousin in Toronto called me and he said, my chuck's stuck, I can't get it off. I said, Terry, did you undo the set screws. He was quite embarrassed. Yeah, I can use the other one, or I can use this one. This one I know fits that one exactly because I use the Easy Wood. See, this one has a flat on it, so it's made specifically for this size. If it didn't have a flat, okay, then putting this in like this, you see how this just fits into a little, well, see how it just fits into a hole like this, and then you can turn it quite easily. Okay, very, very handy tool to have. Okay, how are we doing time-wise? Okay. Okay, so now there's these parts. There it is. All of this wood that I'm using on these, when I go to the wood mill to pick up a job they want me to do and take it back, the guys always keep little offcuts of their wood, and they have a bin that they put their offcuts into that they put outside for people to come and pick up for firewood. And I go through it, and I can't tell you, like those snails, I made a whole set of snails for the nursing home so that they had an activity of painting racing stripes on them and then doing their races with them. Okay, this is just basically a straight spindle. So something like this, you can use your spindle roughing gouge. That's the Record Power one with the dome jaws. If you buy that and you buy it with the dome jaws, when you get the jaws, the edge where they all meet is rounded. And you can tell they were designed by a fellow who turned on a metal lathe on metal. They won't hold. So what I did was I tightened the jaws all the way down, and in my tailstock I put one of those chucks for holding drill bits, and I put a 5mm drill bit in it, and I drove straight down so that the inside where those jaws meet, there's a ridge, and now they hold spindles extremely well. If you go online, YouTube, Pete from Twisted Trees shows how he did that after I told him about it. But see, when you're holding metal on a metal lathe, the fact those are rounded is fine, but it doesn't work with wood because wood gives. And I've told the company about it. Another reason I don't like these lathes. Okay, so after you make your initial one and decide the shape that you want it, and you know what size hole you drilled in your piece, you can kind of make one, try it out, see if it's what you want, and go from there. Now the most important measurement is down here at this end, because it's got to just fit into the hole that you drilled. Okay? So I can come in like this. Or I can use something like this, you know, till I've got the size that I want. Now, say I've done that and I've got that to a 1/2 inch. I don't trust calipers, and that's from experience. So that's when I go back to having a hole the size I want drilled. So I try it out, and lo and behold, it doesn't fit. So if you have to fit something into a specific hole size, take a little piece of plywood, plastic, metal, anything, drill a hole that size, and use it to test. Don't just trust your calipers, because you'd be surprised how many times calipers can move and you're not aware of it. I mean, you knock them on the floor. Not that any of you would ever do anything like that. Let's see. Okay, so it only fits so far. So by pushing this on, I've made a little mark here, and I can tell that right up to there is the right size. And yeah, it's fiddly doing it this way, but in the end, you get what you want. Okay, still another 1/16 to go. Okay. So it's going to taper down this way. Now this is, remember I talked to you about if you want to make a taper with skew, you don't start up here and go straight down. So you start here and you go back a little further every time. Now I'm looking at that and I'm saying to myself, that's way too fat up here at this end. So I take my calipers and I look at it and I say, okay, that's 1/2 inch, this is 3/4. So from about there, I want it to taper down. Now, this is one time you can cut the other way. Okay, I know where I want it to end. Smaller tool rest would be handy for this. Okay, between here and there, I want a cove. And if you want, you don't want to make it too thin there because that's where the handle goes. But you want to take your cups and see if your cup handle will go over that area. Because if you leave all this too big and it won't go through the handle of the cups you're going to put on, you're in trouble. Okay. Now that looks a little big to me. You can leave it big or you can trim it down. Now, if I didn't get that as smooth as I wanted it, okay, looks pretty ugly. How can I fix it? 40. Skew works too. Okay, so don't forget you can use those tools in different ways. And before you go any further, you should sand it. And I think that should be a deeper cove. On my Powermatic, we put 2 lathe beds together and I did a piece that was 20 inches in diameter, 9 feet long. That was an interesting job. I got a call from the wood mill saying, I've got a job for you. I said, okay. So I went over, figured it was going to be another spindle, table leg, whatever. It was a trunnion jig for a bridge. The damn piece of wood was 600 pounds. Put it in the back of my van. They used a forklift. I'm thinking, holy crap, how am I going to get this on a lathe? You know, ended up taking the bed of my lathe and the legs over to a friend of mine's that I'd taught how to turn because he had the same lathe. We attached the 2 beds together. I wouldn't normally advise putting face plates on spindles, but we put them on the ends. Mounted the thing, and we used 6 guys, a forklift, and a chain fall to get the piece of wood up there and centered. And I'll tell you, we all stood well back when I turned it on. That thing ran as true could be. I had taken the corners off the wood with a chainsaw prior to putting it up, so it was somewhere octagonal, not square. Turned it down. The engineer had given me a diagram with exactly the dimensions it had to be on each part. And there aren't calipers that big, unless you want to spend about 10 grand, which I didn't. And so I basically cut pieces of plywood to make calipers with. Turned it all down, we sanded it up. It took us 12 hours to do. And deliver it. In fact, it was the trunnion jig for the bridge at St. Mary. And what they did was they took the wood and they put it in place, got the gears and everything where they wanted, then took it out and put the metal one in. And they were more than happy with it. I think I charged him $1,500 and he gave me $2,500. And I just split it amongst the guys that helped me. Now, being a spindle in a straight area like this, your final sanding on spindles should always be with the grain. even down in the little cove areas, and even on the round parts on the top. Okay, so at that point, I know this is going to fit in the hole. I'd cut it off, sand the top end round. Now when you go to finish those, what I do is I take a scrap of wood, drill a bunch of holes the size I want in it, put them in like this, and then spray them. Okay, I don't get any finish on the very bottom end, but that doesn't matter because that's the end that's going to be glued in. So this one's a little bit loose, and that one, once the glue's in there, it doesn't make a difference. If these were bigger tenons, okay, that were going in, like I was making a giant piece of this, what I would do is take either a parting tool or my pyramid tool, and you can do this on tenons that you're putting in something too. I make a series of little cuts like that. When you add the glue and put those inside the hole, the glue will go into these little holes and it will help everything adhere a little better. Okay? That's basically how it's made. Yeah. So, now, rather than the applause, what I want to know is, did you pick up one little piece of knowledge that you didn't have before? Or one idea you didn't have before? In that case, I did what I set out to do. It wasn't make a finished piece. It was give you